Moonprincess here, and today I'm going to read an article to you, and it's History of the Casket Girls of New Orleans, and it was written by Edward Brandley on October 16th, 2018. The website it's on is gonola.com. Okay, so the Casket Girls. What exactly are Casket Girls? The villas a la cassette. Women with suitcases traveled to French colonies in America. They arrived in the New World with a trunk or cassette containing their belongings. The word cassette morphed into casket over time, and that translated to casket. History recorded these women as Casket Girls. The villas a la cassette were some of the original mothers of New Orleans, and this is their story. Aren't so legends of the Casket Girls. Caskets conjure up images quite different from a suitcase of dresses and petticoats. These women were known to carry on the long voyage to New Orleans. These suitcases were relatively small, so that the women could carry them without assistance. Many of the photos of original cassettes stretched this concept literally so that the suitcases appear to be large enough to carry a body. By the time the storytellers told the tale of these women, their suitcases took on new perspective. Why did young women bring caskets to the New World? Did their luggage contain more than petticoats? Paranormal fiction writers love old New Orleans. The city's mix of catechism and voodoo, set in a location influenced by Africans, French, Spanish, British, and Asian, is considered nirvana for writers. It's natural for writers to run with these and tell vampire tales. Most of the vampire-themed stories, centering on the villas, focus on two things: the caskets and the convent. Perhaps one of the most interesting legends relating to vampires are the stories about the third floor of the 1751 convent building. The legend is that the third floor was sealed off. The windows were permanently shuttered, while some stories say those shutters were nailed down with nails, blessed by a pope. Pope John Paul II was the first pontiff to visit New Orleans. In 1987, one might assume these nails were brought to Rome for blessing, then shipped across the Atlantic. In spite of the holes in the stories, many are still fun to read. Don't pass up the opportunity to visit the old Ursuline convent to decide for yourself. In the meantime, here's a little history about the Casket Girls. History of the Colonies and Casket Girls. The founders of New Orleans were explorers, trappers, and traders who established encampments along the lower part of the Mississippi River. The French established three main outposts along the Gulf Coast: Mobile, Biloxi, and later New Orleans. Because the early explorers were mostly male, Catholic priests in the region became concerned that without wives, the future of Christian evangelism in the French territory was at risk. They turned to bishops and mayors of French port cities who gladly agreed to empty their jails and brothels. This was essentially transportation of undesirable women. These women did not make good domestic partners for the colonial men. The priests sought an alternative. They asked King Louis for assistance. I can't remember if it's 4th, 5th, 6th. I'm not good with Roman numerals. I really apologize. Anyways, the king tasked the Bishop of Quebec with appealing to convents and orphanages in France. They sought out young women who they could contract to come to the colonies. The bishop's expectation was that virtuous women from the convents to be good candidates for marriage. The Casket Girls were contracted to be wives of men in the colonies. Marriage material. The consignment of women traveled to Mobile in 1704. They came on the merchant ship Pelican. Therefore, Mobile affectionately refers to their filles a la cassette as Pelican Girls. A number of these women moved to New Orleans as part of a migration to the larger 1728. New Orleans was 10 years old at this time. Ursuline nuns from Rouen, France, arrived in New Orleans in 1727. The Ursulines' mission was to educate the women of the colony and evangelize the natives. These nuns took charge of the filles a la casette. The women lived with the nuns until they married off to men of the colony. The journey to Louisiana. A young woman heard of the program to bring women to the colonies through the nuns of their convent school or orphanage. The nuns wanted to reduce the number of girls in their care. The women contracted with men who arranged their trip. They traveled from their homes to port cities in France, such as Le Havre. Once in Le Havre, they took ship for America. The women sometimes found themselves waiting for months for the next ship. The passage across the Atlantic took months. The ships usually stopped in Haiti at Cap François, now known as Cap Haitian, on the island's north coast. After picking up supplies and drinking water, the ships pushed on into the Gulf of Mexico. The passage was a difficult one. A number of them died from yellow fever and other travel-related diseases. I apologize for any background noise. Something outside is just like, I don't know if it's the weather or what's going on, but it sounds like wind almost. New Orleans in the 1720s. New Orleans was a French outpost in the 1720s. The capital of Louisiana at the time was Biloxi. Bienville extended his control of the Gulf Coast. He ordered plans and surveys of the land in the crescent of the Mississippi. The city expanded out from Fort St. Charles at what is now Esplanade Avenue in the river. Like many settlements, civilians built homes outside the fort. They built a parade ground for the army troops and a parish church next to it. The French Quarter, as we know it, was just a concept on paper. Most of the Casket Girls didn't see much of their spouses. French women used to working in convents and orphanages now took charge of households. The men of the colony in the 1720s, 1730s were fur trappers and traders. The trappers spent long periods away from home collecting the merchandise they sold for export. The traders took manufactured goods from Europe to the farms, plantations, and outposts for sale. The climate of the colony also required a good bit of adjustment for these women. The weather was hot and the clothing they brought from France was likely wrong for the climate. They adapted to the city as they established households and raised children. The Earthline Sisters. The Earthline Sisters founded a school almost immediately after their arrival in 1727, where many of the women attended until they married. The city built the order's first convent in 1734. That building was replaced by the existing convent in 1751. The old Ursuline convent is the oldest building in the Mississippi Valley. It survived the fire of 1788 because of its distance from the source of the fire, which began closer to the Canal Street. The city built the convent close to Fort St. Charles on the eastern downriver side of Vieux Carré. I don't know, that's how you say that. The Order of St. Ursula continue their mission of educating women in New Orleans to this day. While there were more Ursulines staffing elementary schools such as St. Angela, Merici, and Metairie, the Order focuses its efforts on their high school campus uptown. I decided I'm going to read another article for you today from GoNola.com, and it's called What Are Casket Girls? Founding Matriarchs or Vampire Smugglers. The legend of the Casket Girls of New Orleans runs wild with tales of vampires, ghosts, and illicit activity, but guides at the Ursuline Convent shed light on the truth of their history. And this article is by Liz Genest Smith, August 27th, 2018. And again, I apologize for the noise outside. I was recently introduced to a topic I'd never heard of before, Casket Girls. Sounds creepy? No. Sources vary on the specifics, but the story goes that the city's founders asked France to send over prospective wives for the colonists. France obliged, and many young girls arrived bearing only as many online search, I decided to get to the bottom of this. So I headed over to the Ursuline convent where the girls were said to have resided until the nuns could arrange for marriages. But first I headed over to Crescent d'Or, a block north on Ursuline's Avenue. I'm pretty sure it wasn't open when the Mademoiselles arrived in the 1720s, which is a shame. A sublime raspberry croissant and French market coffee might have softened the blow of arriving in what must have been sweltering, mosquito-infested swamp village, but I digress. Wouldn't you know, I arrived at the convent only to find it closed for the day while a new exhibit was being installed. But as luck would have it, a friendly employee who was coming through the gate was all too happy to share her considerable knowledge about the girls. As it turns out, yes, France had sent plenty of shady characters over to populate New Orleans, convicts, prostitutes, and all-around ne'er-do-wells. But not this group. So where did all the creepy vampire stories come from? The Ursuline ambassador shared a few theories. First of all, these girls endured a long and arduous journey across the Atlantic Ocean. At best, they were pale and gaunt from traveling below deck much of the time. At worst, they were deathly ill. A nasty case of tuberculosis could cause a girl to cough up blood, hence the vampire comparison. Also, their suitcases were called casquettes, or caskets. Ah, nothing says Nosferatu like a coffin handbag. But wait, what about the convent's third-floor windows, said to be nailed shut to keep in or out the vampires' pish-posh? I'm told those are fully functional hurricane shutters that weren't installed until a century after the Casket Girls' arrival. So there you have it. But just because the Casket Girls didn't bring vampires doesn't mean that they're not here. Anyways, then it tells you to